If week 6 in college football was upset Saturday, that gave way to a week 7 that was the overtime chaser. Not as many upsets on Saturday, but numerous games going down to the wire, going into overtime, including a couple games from the SEC. Welcome into SEC Football Unfiltered, our podcast from the USA Today Network. I'm Blake Toppmeyer alongside John Adams. We, of course, will do our almost weekly update on the situation at Florida, where buyout Billy inches closer to out after he snatched victory away from Florida, snatched defeat away from Tennessee in a game the Vols won in overtime. But also, we're going to start with the panic meter around the SEC as Alabama narrowly avoids a disaster loss against South Carolina. Ole Miss suffers its second defeat. Georgia just looks okay in beating Mississippi State. John, what is, before we get into the specifics of it, what's sort of your temperature reading around the SEC right now, where Texas, they continue to look dominant. They crushed Oklahoma, but everyone else, it's like, it's a possibility they could lose any given Saturday.
Yeah, the league is, to paraphrase an old saying applied to conference with a dominant powerhouse, it's Texas and the 15 dwarfs.
Would you have guessed that coming into this season, John? I thought Texas would have no trouble adjusting to the SEC. I thought they were built at the line of scrimmage for this conference. We knew they had multiple good quarterbacks, they had playmakers, but I wouldn't have guessed they'd be the only undefeated team at this juncture of the schedule.
No, I wouldn't either. In fact, I wouldn't have ranked Texas. I didn't. I thought Texas would be good. It would be a seamless adjustment, really, to the SEC because it's loaded with talent and NIL money. So, not a lot to dislike about Texas. But I just thought there were some other teams that looked better on paper to me, particularly when Texas lost C.J. Baxter in preseason, running back. But no, it's clearly the best team. And I think you want to find competition. We'll know more after this week, but right now, there's no question. Texas, it's number one in both polls, deservingly so. It's unbeaten and it's dominating the competition. I think the closest game it had was against Michigan, and that game wasn't close.
I want to follow up on something you just said there, John. You mentioned Texas ranked number one in both the major poll services, and you said deservingly so. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. If I had an AP ballot this year, I would have Texas ranked number one. But there's sort of two schools of thought on this. It's, do you vote based on who have you played, who have you beaten? Because I think if you vote that way, there's a case for Oregon after Oregon beat previously number 2 ranked Ohio State, and earlier this season beat Boise State, and that win looks better and better as Boise State's been crushing its Mountain West opponents since that time. Texas, it's not like they've played nobody. They won at Michigan. They whacked Oklahoma on Saturday, but they don't have a win to match the level of Oregon beating Ohio State. So I think if you vote based on who have you played, who have you beaten, you can make a case for Oregon number one. If you evaluate it via the eye test and just who looks most dominant throughout this first half of the season, I think Texas has been the most consistently dominant team. So I know you don't have an AP ballot this year, but you've had one in the past. How would you sort of weigh those two? And do you think you would go with Texas atop your ballot at this point, or would you look at Oregon or somebody else?
It was funny. I wasn't watching the Oregon game in real time. I was covering the Tennessee game. So, yeah, on face value, I would have said I for some reason I thought that game was at Ohio State, and if Oregon had won in Columbus, I would have said, yeah, Oregon's number one. But then I realized that it was out at Oregon, and then I watched the replay, and I would have Texas number one. The eye test, Texas just looks so strong. And I don't know if anybody else is beating Ohio State. Even though Ohio State lost the game, I came away with a very strong, favorable opinion for Ohio State.
I did too, John. And actually, Sunday for USA Today, I wrote a column looking at the teams that I think could win a national could win the national championship. I had 6 teams on that list, but I sort of have like tier 1 and tier 2. In tier 1 right now, I have Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon, and I have them in that order. If I was ranking teams on an AP ballot, sure, you have to honor Oregon's win in the head-to-head against Ohio State, but that's not what I was doing. I was ranking teams in the likelihood that they could win the national championship, and that is how I look at it, is Texas 1, followed by Ohio State 2, because even though that result went in Oregon's way, I mean, it's a road game for Ohio State. We've seen those cross-country trips be really tough on Big Ten teams this year with the conference expanding from the Western time zone to the Eastern time zone. Those have been really tough trips on Big Ten teams. So it doesn't turn me off at all from Ohio State that they lost by a single point. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, and at some point Ohio State's got to break through with Ryan Day. But if you want to play that game, you say, if not for that offensive pass interference penalty, which we oftentimes don't see officials call, Ohio State gets a game-winning field goal opportunity at the end of that game. So certainly, I think we could see those two teams play again, maybe in the Big Ten championship, maybe again in the college football playoff. But I want to get to sort of the panic meter in the SEC, John. And let's start with Alabama, because Alabama was just sort of moseying along Saturday against South Carolina, but I didn't really feel like the game was in too much jeopardy until about the third quarter. South Carolina came out after halftime, took control of that game for a little while before Alabama reclaimed the lead, and then had to stave off a last gasp attempt from South Carolina. South Carolina could have won it right at the buzzer after recovering an onside kick. So this is now 2 weeks in a row. And really, you add in the fourth quarter of the Georgia game, and it's now 9 straight quarters where Alabama's look pretty concerning as it pertains to their college football playoff hopes. Still sitting on a 5-1 record. I think they can afford one more loss, but with a schedule that includes Tennessee this week, a home game against Missouri, a road game at LSU. This Tennessee game is on the road. I mean, there's some landmines left out there. So based on what you've seen, based on what's kind of ahead here, how do you rate the panic meter on Alabama? Are you not worried, slightly worried, or are you panicking? You pounding that panic button?
I'm slow to panic, but Alabama fans aren't, so they're probably hitting that panic button. I can just see them sitting there banging on that panic button again and again and again. Yeah, first of all, Alabama fans are used to having a really good defense, and this team has given up way too many chunks of yardage in the passing game. It even did that against Vanderbilt, and it did in the second half against Georgia. You look at Alabama, you look at its positions, area groupings, and you see just pretty much average running backs. And I don't say this is on Kalen DeBoer. This is what he was left. He supplemented what he had with through the transfer portal, but Alabama's won some games that were pretty shaky in the last couple of years anyway. So I wouldn't hit the panic button, but I think fans should be concerned, and Kalen DeBoer should be concerned, because when the tidal wave goes against you there, it really goes against you.
Yeah, you pointed out something important there, John, because there is this revisionist history, this false narrative that's going on, that like Alabama started to find itself in these nip and tuck games with South Carolina right after Nick Saban retired. And it's like, I think people are conveniently forgetting that this is the way Alabama has played for the last 3 seasons. Alabama dominated in that pandemic year in 2020. And ever since then, you had NIL and the transfer portal come aboard in 2021. And the last 3 years of Nick Saban's tenure, this is the way it was. Now, they weren't losing to Vanderbilt, but shy of losing to Vanderbilt, this is how they were winning almost week in and week out. I went back and looked at the 2021 season. So that was the first year with Bryce Young as the starter on the heels of Nick Saban's last championship team. Here are some of the results from that 2021 year. Alabama beat a bad Florida team by 2 points. Florida had a 2-point conversion at the end of that game that could have tied it. Connect. Alabama wins by 2. They beat LSU by 6 points. That was a bad LSU team. Ed Ogeron got fired that year. They beat Arkansas by 7 points. They beat Auburn by 2 points. That was a bad Auburn team, the first of 2 bad seasons under Brian Harsin. And they lost to a slightly above average Texas A&M team by 3 points. So that's 5 games I rattled off that they either won by 1 possession or they lost. Those 5 opponents, none of them were better than 9-4 teams. So, and we saw that play out again the past couple seasons as well. I mean, they needed the 4th and 31 miracle last year to win the Iron Bowl. So, like, you're hearing and seeing a lot of chatter right now about like, oh, Nick Saban retires and all of a sudden Alabama loses its dominance. Like, no, Alabama lost its dominance after the 2020 season when NIL and transfers came aboard. So that's not to excuse what's going on in Alabama right now. And, Kalen DeBoer has some things he has to address. First and foremost, some of the penalties and the discipline issues that have hurt Alabama this year. But I think these types of games have just, they're sort of becoming the norm for Alabama now. And the days of them just pasting conference opponents by 50 points are over.
I think if Nick Saban had stayed, Alabama might be in even worse shape right now because he was clearly finished with NIL transfer portal issues. He was weary from it, didn't want to hear about it, didn't want to deal with it. So I thought he was wise to quit. So yeah, you can't put this on DeBoer, but I think some of the nature of the losses, and even the win against Georgia, where I'm already given plural losses. They've only lost 1 game. But when you lose to Vanderbilt, it's like 2 losses to normal teams. So really, Alabama's 5-2.
Vanderbilt 4-2 now, John.
I know, and could be unbeaten in the SEC if not for that narrow loss to Missouri. So I'm kind of getting on that Vanderbilt bandwagon, but I'm doing it cautiously. So I can still throw cheap shots their way. But yeah, I just don't think Alabama was in great shape going into this season. And again, you start looking. Credit to Kalen DeBoer for getting Ryan Williams to recommit after he committed and decommitted and recommitted, because he saved Alabama against Georgia, and or there would be 2 losses. So it's not on Kalen DeBoer right now. He's got to turn it around, certainly, but he's still got, the way this thing is shaken out with these teams. So many teams have lost games we penciled in as wins in preseason. So that shakes things up, and I'm starting to wonder, and this is a topic for another day, but the right kind of 9-3 might get you in the playoff. I never thought that before, but I'm starting to wonder.
I don't know. There's going to be a couple teams in the Big 12 with pretty good records maybe that might have something to say about that. That's sort of what it depends on, I think, is what do the top teams look like in the Big 12 or the ACC. I don't know if a 9-3 SEC team has a great argument against, say, Miami 12-1 if Miami were to lose the ACC championship game to Clemson. So I think that could depend on what happens in the Big 12 and the ACC. All right, so you go ahead.
I bet
Jeff.
Greg Sankey can make a good argument for.
Oh yeah, he'd be
SEC
making a good
team.
argument. He'll be out there arguing for 7-5 Vanderbilt probably come season's end.
Why can't we have 6 at-large teams?
Yeah, it'll be a 12-team playoff with 13 SEC teams in it if Greg Sankey's slotting the bids. All right, so you're hitting the concern button with Alabama, John. You think fans are probably panicking. You maybe aren't panicking, but you're in the concerned range. How about Tennessee? The game that you covered on Saturday. Tennessee now, much like Alabama, 2 concerning games in a row, one of which they lost at Arkansas. The other one they probably should have lost against Florida if not for a bundle of coaching blunders from Billy Napier. But they did escape in overtime against Florida. They're sitting on the 1 loss. They still have Alabama and Georgia on the schedule. And hey, don't overlook Vanderbilt on that schedule. I mean, seriously, they shouldn't be overlooking Vanderbilt at this juncture. Vanderbilt's got the best quarterback in the state. Tennessee, I mean, Nico Iamaleava should be Diego Pavia's caddy. So, what is your concern meter on Tennessee, John? Are you not worried, concerned, panicking? What button you pressing for Tennessee?
I'm pressing concern, same as for Alabama, because Tennessee's still 5-1. It's certainly viable playoff contender. It could win at home Saturday against Alabama, and then it's looking really good for the playoff. A lot of fans are hitting the panic button. One was so panicky, he suggested that Tennessee bench Nico Iamaleava and put in walk-on Gaston Moore. Nico's had a few turnovers in recent games, hasn't played well. So I understand the frustration. The main problem Tennessee has right now when you look at it from a fan perspective, is this whole Josh Heupel era. We're 3.5 seasons in, and it's all about the offense, a flashy offense, high scoring, averaging close to 40 points a game the entire time. Quite an accomplishment. And so here you are in his 4th season, and suddenly the offense is taking on water. And I think Tennessee fans are baffled by it. And Tennessee's relying on a good defense. And the fans are looking at it. Well, if we had our normal offense and this defense, we'd be unbeaten and number 1. And people would be saying, Texas who? It would be Tennessee might be number 1. But so I think there's definitely cause for concern. Tennessee has a great running back in Dylan Sampson. But as you know, you got to throw the ball a little bit, and you got to make clutch plays. Tennessee really didn't make clutch plays against Florida, but Florida sort of made clutch plays on Tennessee's behalf. And you've already name dropped Billy Napier, who can teach. You get him in a close game. He and Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman won against Tennessee, but Tennessee is trying to keep these coaches on their jobs, but I don't know if they'll manage that.
All right, so you're hitting the concern button with Tennessee as well. One of the teams is going to emerge from Neyland Stadium on Saturday, hitting the panic button with Tennessee hosting Alabama. My concern for Tennessee in that game is Alabama showed a few weaknesses, but I think their biggest weakness is pass coverage. The defense is secondary. They lost their All-America cornerbacks, Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry from last season, and then their stud safety, Caleb Downs, transferred to Ohio State. So we knew that would be the position of concern for Alabama. It has been the position of concern for Alabama. So, I mean, Nico Iamaleava, he has to grow up and become the 5-star player he was billed to be, I think, if Tennessee is going to beat Alabama. I mean, I just don't see Tennessee being able to run it down Alabama's throat throughout 4 quarters. I know this is overall not the Alabama defense that it was at the peak of the dynasty, but I just feel like the biggest area of concern for Alabama is in that back end. And if you can't throw it, I think Alabama is going to make you throw it. So Nico's going to have to make some plays, I think, for Tennessee on Saturday. My concern with Tennessee, John, would be even if they beat Alabama, they have the road game at Georgia. Georgia, if they lose to Texas Saturday, Georgia's going to have to be in win-out mode. So Georgia's back's going to be against the wall, playing at home. I think that would be a tough game on Tennessee. So, you know, if you beat Alabama, if you lose to Georgia, you've got to avoid stepping on a landmine somewhere else. And I don't think it's going to be against Mississippi State or UTEP. I got those in the win column. But 2 that I had in the win column coming into the season that now I think you just never know would be at Vanderbilt to end the year, and then Kentucky at home a couple weeks after Alabama. So, I mean, Tennessee would probably be favored in both those games, but I just don't think you could even chalk it up to the fact that this season just comes down to splitting with Alabama and Georgia. I mean, there's still work to be done elsewhere on the schedule based on kind of how we've seen this season play out in the SEC.
Yeah, you got to look at Tennessee's 3 SEC teams. None of those teams are world beaters. Florida's 3-3. Florida's going to have a losing season. I'm pretty sure of that. Oklahoma has virtually no offense. Michael Hawkins, its freshman quarterback. Check out this stat line: 20 carries, 27 yards. So if you want a guy that can get you 1.4 yards per carry, put it in his hands. Otherwise, you might look for alternatives. So Oklahoma, Florida, and Arkansas still probably going to get his coach fired. I could still see Arkansas having a losing season. So yeah, I just think that you can't say with Tennessee's offense now, its defense keeps it in games against maybe even good teams. Its offense keeps opponents in games.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just that Nico hasn't played up to expectations. Their turnovers are an issue. I mean, Florida just pretty much handed Tennessee a win last Saturday.
John, if Joe Milton doesn't get hurt in week 2 of the 2021 season, forcing Josh Heupel's hand to go to Hendon Hooker, and then we know the rest is history with Hendon Hooker. He becomes one of the greatest quarterbacks that Tennessee's ever had, delivers that storybook season in 2022 in which Tennessee almost made the playoff. But how do you think we're looking at Josh Heupel right now if Joe Milton doesn't get injured in week 2? Because Milton was Heupel's guy. He inherited Hendon Hooker. Jeremy Pruitt brought him in as maybe the last and one of the few good things Jeremy Pruitt did at Tennessee was brought in Hendon Hooker, who stayed after Pruitt got fired and Josh Heupel got hired. But Heupel did not hand the keys to Hendon Hooker. He brought in Joe Milton to be his quarterback. And in week 2 of that 2021 season, Milton exited with injury, and Hooker never let him have his job back based on the way he played. But do you think Heupel would have changed quarterbacks at some point? Do you think he would have continued to ride it out with Milton? I'm just wondering now, with the way the last couple of years have gone for Tennessee, they've been good, not great. I mean, a lot of Josh Heupel's success is pinned on that 2022 season. What happens if Joe Milton doesn't get hurt in 2021?
Well, I know what doesn't happen. Josh Heupel doesn't more than double his salary after the 22 season. That's for sure, because he was wrong about the quarterback, and he really went out of his way to get Joe Milton. Joe Milton started a few games at Michigan. Again, wowed everybody with that big arm until people saw he's very limited in what he sees on the field and on touch passes, on a variety of things. So he lost his job. Nonetheless, Josh Heupel said he looked at the quarterbacks he had returning, and he had a few of them, guys that had started games, and saw Hendon Hooker, who had started games at Virginia Tech, hadn't flourished there. But he said, nah, I don't need these guys for my offense. I need Joe Milton. Well, he got Joe Milton, and that didn't work out. He went through an entire season last year, and I was saying, hey, give Nico a chance. Last season as a freshman. I wonder in retrospect if Tennessee would be better off now if it had played Nico more last season.
I don't think it could hurt. I mean, he looks like a young quarterback that's still got some growing up to do, and I don't know if a couple starts last November would have solved all that, but it wouldn't have hurt that season. Tennessee was not going to lose, or it really wouldn't have altered the record for Tennessee. I don't think that if he would have changed quarterbacks at the midpoint of that season and went to Nico, and it may have set them up better for this year. But a couple more to get to here, John, on the panic meter test. Let's go to Ole Miss. I was covering that game Saturday in Baton Rouge, and the history of the Magnolia Bowl better than almost anyone, being a Louisiana native, having covered several of those games. It's just kind of a wild, wacky series where you can never really trust, what you've seen the first couple quarters to be the story of the game in the end. And Ole Miss dominated that game throughout the first half, and yet they sat on just a 17-13 halftime lead because they blew a lot of scoring opportunities in the first quarter in particular. And you just sort of had this feeling at halftime, if you hang on long enough, LSU might steal this thing. And sure enough, they did. Garrett Nussmeier, wasn't a great night for him. I mean, Nussmeier afterwards called it one of the worst performances of his career. He completed just more than 40% of his passes. He had a couple interceptions, but he's the best thing LSU has going for it, and he just kept slinging it. And finally, in the fourth quarter, he got hot, converted a couple fourth downs on a game-tying drive, and then, boom, hits a 25-yard strike in overtime, and the fans are storming the field. And Ole Miss, Ole Miss lost a game in which it never trailed until the final play of the game. But isn't that just the Magnolia Bowl in a nutshell, John? And so now Ole Miss sits here at 5-2 in what was supposed to be a dream season for the Rebels and Lane Kiffin. What's your panic meter saying on Ole Miss?
Well, first of all, with Garrett Nussmeier, those fans that celebrated the victory and rushed onto the field, they would have been coming after Garrett Nussmeier. They'd have lost that game. It would have been a completely different mindset. Boy, he was good in the clutch. So he made some big time throws under duress. He also ran a couple of times for key yardage. I'm more impressed with him. Even on, he says, the worst performance of his career. A lot of quarterbacks would take that, a win over a top 10 team. So yeah, kudos to him. As for Ole Miss, I would definitely hit the panic button. The main reason is, I think going into the season, there's still doubts about Ole Miss because it's not a traditional power. As well as it's done under Lane Kiffin, it still doesn't have that resume that makes you think, yeah, he can really do it. When I looked at this team on paper, I thought of it not just a playoff contender, but a championship contender. Bring in all these transfer portal guys, improve the defense, got plenty of talent on offense. So, and now you've got 2 losses, one of them to Kentucky. So, really, 2 games Ole Miss should have won, and it lost them both. I mean, I'd hit the panic meter and probably the anger meter too, because this is kind of Ole Miss's shot. I mean, this is its team. It had a favorable schedule. As I said, it brought in some key transfers, but it's just not making the kind of plays that decide close games, and bad things are happening to it. The Kentucky game, Kentucky converted a couple of fourth down. What was that? A 4th and long, and it completes a touchdown pass. I mean, that kind of stuff. It looks like one of those teams where people start saying, well, we're just cursed. No, you're not cursed, but you got to play better in the clutch. So even though Garrett Nussmeier's stats weren't good, he's the one that made the plays to win the game, not Jackson Dart, who had better stats. So I just think, yeah, Ole Miss fans still got to play Georgia. But I just felt like Ole Miss was the better team in both of those games, and it lost certainly against Kentucky. And I thought it was better than LSU. And it loses both games. So here it is. It should be sitting pretty with unbeaten record and a bye. Instead, it's got 2 losses, and it's 1 loss away from elimination from playoff discussion.
Yeah, 1 loss away, and Georgia's still on the schedule. Not that Georgia looks invincible, but I would hate for my playoff hopes to be pinned to a win-or-go-home game against Georgia. And they have to go to Arkansas. Arkansas has been, I think, a little bit better than advertised in Fayetteville. That can be tough on Ole Miss too. So, it's not just down to that one game. There's a couple other games there that Ole Miss could lose as well. And Ole Miss went so hard and heavy on their defense via the transfer portal this offseason, John. I think that was a good move. Their defense is better, and they spent big on improving that defense. But I put both these losses on the offense. You hold LSU to 23 points in regulation. I mean, the strength of that team is Garrett Nussmeier and those receivers. And there were a lot of possessions in that game. That was a game that spanned 4 hours and 16 minutes, just to tell you how many plays and possessions there were in that game. So you limit LSU to 23 points in regulation. I know the defense didn't deliver the stop on that final drive, and that made the defense look bad. But I'm sorry, you're Lane Kiffin. You're supposed to be the great quarterback developer, the great offensive mind. You hold LSU to 23 points in their building. Your offense needs to find a way to win that game. And Ole Miss's offense blew it time and again. They couldn't solve Kentucky's defense either. And so, yeah, I think it paid off the way they addressed their defense. via the offseason, but the offense is not holding up its end of the bargain. I mean, Jackson Dart was sacked 6 times on Saturday night, threw a costly interception, and he just couldn't step on the throat. Like, there were numerous occasions in the second half where you felt like if Ole Miss could just get one more score, they were going to put LSU away, and they couldn't get it done. And the other reason I'm pounding the panic button for Ole Miss, John, is not just the record and the increasing possibility that they're going to miss the playoffs, but what happens to Lane Kiffin if he goes 9-3 or 8-4 this season and starts to wonder, is this all there is for me at Ole Miss? Have I hit my ceiling here? And then, oh, looky there, Florida has fired Billy Napier. You know, if Lane Kiffin's sitting on 11-1 in the college football playoff, I know he left Tennessee in the most infamous moment of his getting fired on the tarmac at USC probably still ranks as the most infamous moments. But he's not leaving an 11-1 Ole Miss playoff team to take a rebuild at Florida. But if this season continues to fizzle and he goes 8-4, 9-3, and Florida needs a new coach, he might look pretty good to Florida still, and he might be thinking, what am I still doing here in Ole Miss? It's time to restart the clock, go rebuild a different program, and see if I got a higher ceiling over there, which I don't know that he will. But we've talked before, you know the way these coaches think. They always think they're one job away from having all their problems solved.
Yeah, and the nature of those two losses to get into both Kentucky and LSU. When you say it's the LSU game was on you could say the same thing about the Kentucky game. It's on the offense, not the defense. Even though Kentucky made plays at the end, it shouldn't have come down to the end. That game should have been neatly tucked away in the win column. And Lane Kiffin is an offensive guy. I think he needs to kind of reassess what he's doing with a lead. He's got a better defense. Maybe he's got some of the same things going on with Josh Heupel. He's trying to be more conservative since he's got a better defense, but his offense has been flying high, and that's kind of his reputation, big offense. But yeah, those are he's still, even if Ole Miss falls on its face, Lane Kiffin will be in demand, I think, as a coaching hire, don't you? Because of what he's done overall.
If you spend as much as 2 minutes on any Florida message board, you can see that Florida fans, that's who they want. Now, fans don't make the hire. We know that. But, yeah, just as one sort of litmus test of whether he's going to be in demand, if he goes 9-3 at Ole Miss, he's still going to be in demand, at least as far as Florida fans are concerned. Let's check in on one more panic meter, John, and then I want to kind of follow up on the situation at Florida. How about Georgia? This was supposed to be a get-right game for Georgia. And they were, this was a game, I was in the press box at LSU, sort of keeping, one eye on a couple different games. And there were multiple times I look up at the TV and Georgia was winning pretty comfortably against Mississippi State. And then you look up there toward the end, it's like, wait a second, how's this just a 10-point game? Georgia let Mississippi State get back in that game, hang around. Mississippi State hung 31 points on Georgia, and we know they're sitting there with the one loss. They have Texas in the highest profile game this weekend. They still have Tennessee remaining on the schedule as well. They have Ole Miss, a road trip to Ole Miss. So, I mean, several potential pitfalls for Georgia still, first and foremost, with what could be a big free fall into a black hole in Austin, Texas. So where are you at in your sort of concern meter, panic meter for Georgia?
I'm not hitting the panic meter, but I've got it nearby. I can I can reach it without straining. Just, move a few inches more and tap it. Here's the thing. Georgia beat Kentucky 13-12. The offense looked dismal. Now it gives up 31 points to Mississippi State and wins by 10. The defense looked miserable. So that raises too many questions. Whom can you count on at Georgia right now? I don't know. I just used to be the defense. I don't see that now. Alabama scored 28 points in the blink of an eye against it early in that game. So I'm really wondering about Georgia. I don't think of it at all the way I used to. And yeah, the offense was clicking against Mississippi State. And everybody's offense clicks against Mississippi State. That's no
Right.
great achievement. It's designed to do that. So, yeah, I think our Georgia fans should be very concerned, uh, particularly going into Austin, Texas, against that Texas juggernaut right now.
Yeah, and I think of the 4 teams we discussed, Georgia has the toughest schedule remaining when you factor in road trips to Texas, to Ole Miss, and then a home game against Tennessee. You add it up. I mean, all these teams have losable games, multiple losable games left on the schedule. But I think Georgia's, in particular, is the toughest schedule of all of them. And then, I mean, Georgia Tech's at the end of the season. You wouldn't think they would lose to Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech's substantially better this year. Georgia Tech's sitting on a 5-2 record. So, I mean, there's not a lot of layups left on Georgia's schedule. They do have Massachusetts, UMass on the schedule, and they got the neutral site game against Florida, which might be the next closest thing to a layup. But the other 4 games on their schedule, they could lose any of them. You lose 2 out of the 4. I think you're putting a lot on Greg Sankey's shoulders to be groveling in front of the the playoff committee to get you into
Please
playoff.
help us here. Please help us.
That's right.
When you were talking, I was thinking about those 4 teams you put in front of the well, not the firing squad, but the panic meter. So I don't think it's out of the question that they could lose 3 games, all 4 of them. Ole
All
Miss
4
is,
could finish 9-3.
yeah,
Yeah.
Ole Miss is 1 loss away, so that's not a stretch at all. You look at Alabama, it's still got to play Missouri. You never know how that Auburn game will go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can lose to Vanderbilt, play South Carolina close, you can certainly lose to Auburn. So, it could lose at Tennessee this week. It could lose at Missouri. When you lose to Vanderbilt, everything's in play. Then you look at Tennessee. I mean, it lost to Arkansas, almost lost to Florida. So again, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, at Georgia. Georgia could lose at Ole Miss, and Georgia could certainly lose at Texas. Georgia's done. It could be the next team out. It could lose this game to Texas and then lose at Oxford as well. Just because Ole Miss is botched a couple of close games doesn't mean it couldn't rise up and beat Georgia.
Yeah, and then you look up at the end of the season, and your playoff representatives from the SEC are Texas, Texas A&M, and maybe LSU, and
What
and the
about
SEC sitting on a 3 business.
Missouri? What about Missouri?
Oh, I left them dead and buried after they
I
lost
know
by
you
30,
did. I
31
know, but
points.
I would leave the shovel nearby.
Might
You
have to
might have to
resurrect
dig
them.
them up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, perform an exhumation there of the Tigers. We'll see what happens when
That's
they go to Tuscaloosa in a couple weeks. If they win that, I'd be in need of that shovel and stuff Alabama in the hole and bring the Tigers back. Happy Halloween. John, I mentioned the situation at Florida. Billy Napier, as we record this, is still an employed man. Why? How? Well, that could be for another episode. But we think we know where this ends, and that's with Florida stroking a $26 million check to Billy and saying, thanks for the lack of memories. See you later. Now, we mentioned a month ago, John, that Lane Kiffin would seem tailor-made for this job. And if he's not in the playoff at Ole Miss, Lane could say, bye-bye, Rebels. But the question I've started to have with Florida is, what if it's not Lane Kiffin? We always act like money's never any object for these schools. And for certain schools, that's true. But when you think about it, it was just a few years ago that Florida had to pay Dan Mullen a pretty good penny to go away. Now they'd be on the hook for $26 million for Billy Napier. Lane Kiffin's making $9 million a year at Ole Miss to go 9-3. If you want to pry him loose at Ole Miss, I'm thinking, what's that going to take? A 10-year, $100+ million contract, that sort of Brian Kelly money that LSU forked over a few years ago for a guy that's never made the playoff, been a really good coach, but never made the playoff. And I'm thinking, what if it becomes either cost prohibitive for Florida, or maybe Lane decides he's fine getting paid $9 million a year at Ole Miss to go 9-3, and he's not going anywhere. When you start to look at the hot board, the realistic hot board, we're not living in fantasy land, but a realistic hot board past Lane is starting to get pretty bleak. Because when we discussed this a month ago, we had names like Lance Leipold of Kansas on that hot board, Eli Drinkwitz of Missouri on the hot. I mean, there's just a lot of guys that. Jed Fish at Washington. Jed Fish just got thumped by Iowa. Iowa just scored 40 points on Jed Fish. I'm not letting anybody come near my program that just let up 40 points to Iowa. So I mean, the hot board is. I'm finding myself crossing off more names than I'm adding. I know you mentioned Matt Rule at Nebraska. I don't know if he would leave after a good season at Nebraska for Florida or not, but once you get past Lane Kiffin, it does get a little bit murky, I think, if and when this Florida job opens. I'm going to throw out a handful of names at you, John, and then I want 5 names. So get your pencil ready, and then you rank them 1 through 5 to what you like best to worst. And I tried to do this realistically. I'm not trying to live in fantasy world where we're hiring Bill Belichick or something here. So here's my 5 names. If you can't or are unable, Kiffin won't leave, whatever reason, Kiffin's not the Florida coach. Here's my 5 names at this juncture. Jamie Chadwell at Liberty. Keeps winning games at the group of 5. Never coached Power 4. There's name number 1. Name number 2. I can already predict your reaction to this one, John, but hear me out. I mentioned him a month ago. I'm going to mention him again. Andy Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator at Penn State. Penn State's offense finally has a pulse. They finally got a quarterback who can complete a few passes. And I just mentioned the shine is off Lance Leipold at Kansas. Well, who was his offensive coordinator at Kansas that made Lance Leipold look so good and is now at Penn State? That was Andy Kotelnicki, who was Lance Leipold's OC when Kansas was looking good. So I feel like I had to make a strong pitch there because I know the way you often feel about hiring coordinators. So there's the pitch for Kotelnicki. Name number 3, Curt Cignetti, Coach Sigs at Indiana. The Hoosiers are 6-0. He was previously at James Madison, won a bunch of games there. After he was hired at Indiana, they asked him about his style. He just said, Google me. In other words, check out my record. I win ball games. He won a bunch of them at James Madison. He's 6-0 at Indiana. He was previously a really good coach at the FCS and Division II levels. His record is very, very impressive. Hasn't done it to the level of Florida, though. Final 2 names for you, John. Matt Campbell seems like he's been at Iowa State for a lifetime. He was at Toledo before that. Iowa State was kind of hanging around that 7-6 mark the last few years. Well, now Matt Campbell has his best team he's had in several years. Iowa State is 6-0. Florida, I think, could definitely afford Matt Campbell. And then the last name for you, Matt Rule at Nebraska. You don't need his resume because you were already pitching him a month ago. You know what he can do as a program builder. We've seen him do it from Temple to Baylor to now Nebraska. So those are your 5 names. How do you rank them worst to best for who you would want for Florida if they can't get Lane Kiffin?
Okay. Worst to best. I'll eliminate your offensive coordinator. You want to pronounce his name again for me?
Yeah, Andy
Kotelnicki. Yeah. Okay, he's 5. Jamie Chadwell's 4. Matt Campbell's 3. And then that leaves me with Cignetti and Rule. I'll go with Rule 1 and Cignetti number 2. I really like that answer. That's going to win over some Florida fans asking him about his record and whatever, and he just says, Google me.
Yeah.
That should be his nickname. Google me. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a little skeptical of that idea maybe a month ago, but you know how quickly these things change, and you start to look at his resume, and we talked about Kalen DeBoer now. Well, I mean, Kalen DeBoer maybe not looking so hot right now, but I know we both believe long term that Kalen DeBoer is a good coach, and he won at every level, and that's not as good as winning in the SEC, but it's kind of hard sometimes to pry loose a guy who's winning in the SEC. So if you can't get that, I do think it can be tempting to pick a guy who's. I don't think Curt Cignetti's ever had a losing season, whether it be Division II, FCS, James Madison, now Indiana. He's never had a losing year. So I don't know. That's one that's kind of creeping up my list for Florida.
Well, Florida fans relate entertaining, exciting offenses with championships because of Urban Meyer and then Steve Spurrier. So Cignetti checks those boxes. He's also been beating the spread consistently, which is another good thing that would appeal to Florida fans. Uh, Maybe what he should do, we have players all the time. They say, first we used to hear about him opting out of bowls. Now we hear about him. Well, I'm going to take a red shirt. I'll see you guys. Best of luck to you. Wish you all well. Love you guys, but I'm not going to play anymore this year, and then I'm going to transfer. So maybe Cignetti just needs to withdraw right now, come up with a mystery illness, and take that unbeaten record to the house and just sit and wait back for the job offers to come in.
Not a terrible strategy. And there's going to come a day, John, where a playoff qualifier leaves his team in the cold and takes a new job.
Sure.
If Indiana squeaks its way into the playoff, maybe Kurt Cignetti can become that guy. Because I'm sorry, but Indiana, great story so far in the first half of the season, but you can squeak into the playoff. You're not winning the national championship with that team. So someone comes to the table with a $9 million offer. You say, well, thanks for the season, boys. Good luck in the playoff with your interim coach. I'll be hanging out down here in the swamp if you want to come see me after the season ends when the portal opens.
Yeah, he could just say, hey, I've done all I could here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got this team in the playoff. Are you kidding me? I got Indiana in the playoffs. What more can you ask for? Nobody else is going to do that.
Well, I'm glad I tempted you with one of those names, John. I knew I couldn't trump.
You did.
I knew I would not do Matt Rule, but I thought you might just offhandedly cast aside this entire cast. But
no. But if the offensive coordinator's last name would have been easier to pronounce, I would have considered him.
He might have been 4 instead of 5.
Yeah.
All right, let's pick some games here, John. Our records for the season, we're still doing great overall. I'm 25-13 against the spread. I went 4-2 last week. Hit my lock again. Boy, it's going to be a sad day when I finally miss that lock. You had a bit of a rough week. You went 2-4, but you're still 21-17 for the season. I know Ball State kind of crushed you on your lock at the end there, John, didn't they? Fill us in. I know you were watching intently on that game against Kent State.
Yeah, I was watching the game cast on ESPN as I was watching another game on TV, and yeah, it was really it was one of those dagger to the heart moments because I look at there and they've got 4th down. Kent State's got 4th down in its own territory, so and then it makes the 1st down. I check back, it's made the 1st down. Then I check back again. There's only like 40 seconds left. It throws a 53-yard touchdown pass.
Ooh.
I mean, in fairness to Ball State, that's a horrible team too. So these were two lightweights going at it. But Ball State controlled the game most of the afternoon, and then it just fell apart at the end, which is what bad teams do. And keep in mind, Ball State walked away a winner.
But you walked away a loser.
I walked away a loser. And so it was, I wish Kent State could have won the game because I wanted Ball State to be punished for what it did to me. I like the names of those people in the secondaries. Were they in a prevent defense?
Sounds like
53-yard pass with 40 seconds to go.
All right. Well, I'm curious to find out who Kent State's playing this week when we get to our lock of the week segment. But we got quite a few here in the SEC to get through, John. So we'll try to keep our thoughts brief as we proceed forward. Let's start off with third Saturday in October. Are we there already? Season's flying by. Alabama is a 2.5-point road favorite at Tennessee. The game you will be covering Saturday, John. With you covering it, you go first. Who are you taking in that one?
I'll take Tennessee. It's got one of the best home field advantages in college football now. I think that was a factor against Florida. It would have been a different outcome in the swamp. Also, Alabama, we didn't really mention this in analyzing Alabama's woes, but Jalen Milroe did not protect the football well against South Carolina.
True.
South Carolina's front defense gave Alabama trouble. Tennessee's is even better and certainly deeper. So I like Tennessee to cover there in a real close game.
Yeah, you make a good point about Milroe. If he has turnover issues, Alabama has no real chance of making the playoffs because I think they're going to go as far as Milroe will take them with some of the penalty and defensive concerns. I'm concerned about both these teams' playoff fortunes, but I'm going to lean the team with the team that has a better quarterback. And even with Milroe's turnover issues last week, I think he's just a lot farther along in his development than what Nico is. And so I will take Alabama and give the 2.5 points. Next one, John. Let's save Georgia, Texas, the premier game. So let's skip ahead to Auburn at Missouri. Missouri, a 5.5-point favorite. Hand me the shovel, John, because I'm bringing Missouri back to life a little bit. Even after I said I left them dead and buried after the A&M game, I'm starting to shovel a little bit of that dirt off the grave and say that they win in convincing fashion at intimidating Faurot Field and continue Auburn's miserable season. So I'll give the 5.5 points and take the home team, take the Tigers. Well, the Missouri Tigers.
Yeah, I probably will. I guess I will too. I'd rather it be like I thought it might be like a 4-point line. I was thinking the game was at Jordan-Hare Stadium. So initially when I looked at it, but yeah, that's a big factor. And Missouri certainly has a better quarterback. So yes, I like Missouri there too.
Yeah, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable too if it was about 3.5. We don't set the lines; we just bet the lines.
Yes, that's right.
How about two teams that really struggle offensively? Although South Carolina found a little bit of pulse on offense until the critical moments at the end of that game against Alabama on Saturday, and now it's South Carolina at Oklahoma. This game, sort of the definition of mediocrity. Home team gets favored. And what would probably be a pick'em game otherwise. Oklahoma favored by 2.5. You can get us started on this one.
Well, I've already mentioned Michael Hawkins, Oklahoma's quarterback, is 20 carries, 27 yards against Texas. South Carolina has a better. I like their freshman quarterback better, and so I'll go with South Carolina.
All right, we're going to head in different directions on this one. South Carolina continues to be a team under Shane Beamer, John, where they get up for the big games, and he can really motivate his guys when there's a number next to the opponent, ranked team comes up on their schedule. They pushed LSU to the brink this year. They pushed Alabama to the brink last week, but they also barely got past Old Dominion. They got whacked by Kentucky. And now on the road against an Oklahoma team licking its wounds. I just like South Carolina less when they're playing the easier teams. So I will take Oklahoma, rely on the Sooners defense to deliver a victory and cover the 2.5 points. Moving on, LSU preserving their playoff hopes with the rally last week. Now they're at Arkansas. This just reeks of that potential letdown game. You have the emotional high, thousands of fans storming the field, handing you your flowers after the rivalry win against Ole Miss. Next week, LSU has Texas A&M, another rivalry game that's going to be circled on the schedule. This one just looks like a booby trap to me, John. LSU is a 3-point road favorite at Arkansas. I'm going to take Arkansas in the points. Strikes me as could be like a 30-28 game. If I was betting the money line, I think I'd take LSU, but feels like it could go either way, be decided at the end. Sometimes this game is. We've seen that last few years at times, and so Arkansas, the home team, getting 3 points. I'll take the points with the home team.
Yeah, that makes sense. However, I'm not sure about Taylon Green's status. Arkansas's quarterback. I saw the backup. In LSU's pass rush against what I thought it was a better offensive line, Ole Miss over Arkansas in that area, really pressured Jackson Dart. So, and also I just loved the way Nussmeier pulled that game out. So I'll take LSU. But it's got injury issues. A lot of teams do at this point. If he can get Chris Hilton back at wide receiver, that would really make life easier for the Tigers.
Yeah, they really have some talented wide receivers. I mean, they were down 3 of their, call it, top 6 receivers against Ole Miss, and still Kyron Lacy and Aaron Anderson made so many big plays, particularly Kyron Lacy. I know he made some got a boneheaded penalty in week 1 and was rightfully hammered for that penalty in the free press by just acting a fool after a score and getting a costly penalty. But he's been more disciplined since then, and just talking pure talent. To me, he's a first team all conference wide receiver. Game on the line, I want the ball headed to someone like Kyron Lacy. And when the game was on the line Saturday, that's exactly where Garrett Nessmeyer was, and it was game over. So, yeah, I could see that one going either way. Don't really have much fault with your pick of LSU. Like I said, I think if it was on the money line, I would take LSU. But I'll take Arkansas on the points. So we got one more, and then the big game, John. Kentucky at Florida. A game that Kentucky has owned the last few years. It's propped up Mark Stoops' resume. He loses a few games that he shouldn't lose on paper, and then he beats Florida, and, well, everybody hails him a hero. Well, I'm not sure you'd feel very heroic by beating this Florida team, but nonetheless, the Gators are a 2-point home favorite. Is Billy Napier coaching for his job? I mean, heck, every time he shows up, he's coaching for his job, and to some degree, I feel like his fate's maybe already been decided. But at the Swamp, we saw Florida lay it on UCF just a couple weeks ago in the Swamp. Kentucky, you don't know what to make of them. They're Jekyll and Hyde. Shoot, give me the home team, I guess, in a matchup like this, John. I'll take Florida and give the 2 points.
Yeah, I would too. I like the way DJ Lagway, the freshman, played against Tennessee. Played well. He could handle the pressure, even though Florida lost. Florida's defense has definitely improved over the course of the season. Kentucky still lacks offense, and gosh, you lose to Vanderbilt after. I mean, Vanderbilt's track record is when it has one of those miraculous wins that no one ever saw coming, then it falls on its face in the next outing. Not this time, thanks to Kentucky and Mark Stoops. So, yeah, I'm not too fond of Kentucky right now. So I would go with Florida as well.
All right, that leaves the game I'll be at, John, and I think about approximately 7 million people will be in Austin, Texas with me. They got the big game with Georgia this weekend. Also, a Formula One race is in town. I'm sure there's about 17 other things going on in Austin. There always is. How about this, John? I booked my hotel, a Courtyard, about a year ago for this game. Both of us rewards members, pretty lofty status within the Marriott family. I got an email from some hotel manager at Marriott about a month ago and said, "Oh, sorry, we accidentally overbooked the Courtyard, but we've taken the liberty to move your reservation to the Fairfield down the road, and the rate will be the same." Huh. Well, I'm sure the Fairfield rate was a lot cheaper back at the time when I booked 11 months ago. Overbooked? I call nonsense. They thought they could open up my room at the Courtyard and book it for about $1,000 a night with everything that's going on that weekend. So we might have to rethink our allegiance to Marriott, John, after this fiasco.
Well, don't put Blake in the corner. That's what I say.
Yeah,
I would no, I would go all the way to Mr. Marriott on that one. I would not let them do that to me.
Yeah, my only concern, John, was raising a little too much ruckus, and they said, "Okay, well, we've taken the liberty of canceling your reservation entirely, and enjoy yourself at the Motel 6 about an hour outside of town." But so maybe I'll go to the head of the organization after I've completed.
Yeah, I think you can go after them later. Yeah, they do have the leverage in the situation. Sure,
They really do.
or maybe you can stay in Baton Rouge across the river again and make a really long drive.
Oh boy, you're giving me horrifying flashbacks to last weekend. Thanks for twisting the knife there, John. Will Texas will they twist the knife on Georgia? Texas 3.5-point favorite. Who would have guessed at the beginning of the season that Texas? I know they're the home team, but you would have seen this maybe as a pickup game or a pick'em game in the preseason. Now Texas 3.5 7-point favorite. I'm going to take the Longhorns, John. I always say I won't rule out, talent-laden team as a national championship contender, and that's why I still have Georgia and Alabama on the bottom of my list of teams that can win a national championship. I think they have too much talent to cross them off the list of teams that can win it all. However, I think the two most talented teams in the country are Texas and Ohio State. I don't think that conversation, Georgia's in that conversation. They still got a lot of talent. They don't have as much talent as what Texas has. And I don't think they have as much talent as Ohio State has. And Oregon might have the best quarterback of the bunch, particularly with how Dylan Gabriel played on Saturday. So, yeah, this is Georgia, the road team. And I think that this is one of the rare times where they're at a talent disadvantage against their opponents. So give me the Longhorns.
Yeah, I like the Longhorns too. In fact, if the line was, you said it's 3.5.
3.5.
If it were 7.5, I'd still take the Longhorns. I really like Texas in this game.
Wow. Okay. That'd be easier for me. I've been covering these games just like you did last week, decided at the buzzer. Those are not easy on the deadline column scenarios. So, yeah, a comfortable Texas victory would make my life a little bit easier on Saturday. All right, John, let's make our locks and get out the door on week 7. For my lock, John, I am turning to Army. 2 of the service academies are undefeated. Navy and Army both, becoming one of the better stories in college football this year. I've seen Army play a couple times. They run the option offense to perfection. They're very physical. They've just been plowing over opponents. Now, I know they haven't played anyone great. They'll have Notre Dame later this season, but they're not squeaking past. They are laying waste to the competition. They're a 14 favorite against East Carolina this week, and I am locking in Army to win with another blowout.
Imagine if Notre Dame's only 2 losses were to, they've already lost to Northern Illinois. Imagine if it lost to Army and its 2 losses were Northern Illinois and Army, and knocking it out of the playoffs. Well, as much as that loss hurt me Saturday, I'm not backing off from Kent State. I'm going to give Kent State a second chance here.
I said I was eager to find out who Kent State was playing this week, and here we go.
But Bowling Green. Bowling Green's like a 20.5-point favorite.
Okay.
I mean, I think any team in the country on a given day can beat Kent State by more than 20.5 points. So I just think I don't see it coming close against Ball State. I don't think that's going to give renewed confidence to the Golden Flashes. I think they'll think about the game. Boy, we're lucky to only lose by 2 in that game. We're probably due for a real drubbing next Saturday. And next Saturday's coming, and Bowling Green will take care of the drubbing.
This is how little you think of Kent State. Bowling Green is just 2-4 this season, and they got a 20.5-point spread. But Kent State's 0-6. Boy, if you could just lock in Kent State on the money line, I know the odds wouldn't pay a great payout, but you'd have more money than you started the season with, just going against Kent State on the money line. But got to take the spread. So Bowling Green's got to cover the 20.5, and we'll be back next week to find out what Kent State did in that game and find out and discuss the happenings, more to the point, in the SEC as well. Thanks for listening to this edition of SEC Football Unfiltered.